Welcome to the 10 Days Before Christmas, a collection of modern BL short stories, told softly between falling snow, quiet lights, and those small moments where everything can change. Each day leading up to Christmas, a meeting, a pause, a confession, a simple story, but never an ordinary one. Take a breath. Settle in. Here is today's story.
Snow pressed against the windows like the world was trying to listen in. It wasn't the picturesque kind people posted online. This snow came sideways, heavy and determined, streaking the glass and smudging the city into bands of light and shadow. Street lamps bled into one another. Shop windows glowed without edges. The night looked unfinished, as though someone had paused it mid-thought. The train had been stopped long enough that time felt optional. Elliot had checked his watch twice, then again. Then he'd turned the screen face down, as if refusing to acknowledge it might make the minutes behave differently. They didn't. They only stretched, thin and uncomfortable, daring him to sit with them. An announcement crackled overhead. Apologies for the delay. Weather conditions. Signal interference. No clear estimate at this time. The words were familiar enough to feel insulting. Elliot exhaled slowly through his nose and leaned his head back against the seat. The plastic was cold even through his coat. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to stop noticing everything he didn't want to think about. Home was supposed to be 35 minutes away. A simple commute, routine, predictable. He'd planned to stop at the grocery store and buy something vaguely festive, something that suggested intention, a wreath, a candle, anything that made the apartment feel less like a place he passed through and more like somewhere meant to be occupied. Instead, he'd stayed late at the office, again. He told himself it was focus, responsibility, but the truth pressed closer in the quiet. Going home meant acknowledging how quiet it would be. December had a way of amplifying empty spaces. The silence weighted differently this time of year, like it expected company. 2 years single, almost 3. Not freshly broken-hearted, not dramatically lonely, just unattended, like a room no one entered anymore because everyone assumed someone else was already inside. He wondered when being alone had stopped feeling temporary. That bad, huh? The voice cut cleanly through his thoughts. Elliot startled, breath catching before he could stop it, and turned toward the sound. The man across the aisle was watching him, not with concern sharpened into curiosity, not with the fleeting politeness of a stranger, just openly, calmly, like Elliot's presence had registered as something worth noticing. He held a paper coffee cup between both hands, fingers long and relaxed around the cardboard sleeve. Steam rose in slow curls, catching the overhead light. He wore a dark wool coat that fit him well, structured without looking stiff, and a charcoal scarf looped once at his throat, the ends tucked neatly into his collar. His shoulders were broad but not imposing, posture easy like someone comfortable in their own skin. His hair was dark and slightly damp, brushed back with a few strands escaping near his temple, as though he'd been running his hand through it absent-mindedly. His face was clean-shaven, jaw strong but softened by the faint suggestion of a smile. When he shifted, the light caught a subtle warmth in his eyes. Brown, Elliot realized, with flecks that turned almost gold when he tilted his head. Good-looking, Elliot thought distantly, but it was his eyes that held Elliot. Warm, observant, the kind of attention that didn't demand anything, but didn't look away either. Elliot blinked, grounding himself. Just tired. I was supposed to be home an hour ago. The man nodded, as though this confirmed a shared suspicion. Same. I think the train has decided we live here now. The humor was gentle, unforced. It felt slip past his defenses before he could stop it. A quiet laugh escaped him, brief, surprised, real. Guess we should start paying rent, Elliot said. Only if they promise better heating, the stranger replied, glancing pointedly at the vents humming uselessly above them. Silence followed, but it didn't collapse. It settled. The train lights dimmed slightly. Somewhere further down, someone slept, chin tipped forward, scarf slipping loose. Outside, snow continued its aimless dance, unconcerned with schedules or destinations. They didn't exchange names. They talked anyway. About small things, at first, safe things. The weather, how winter always seemed to arrive late and overcompensate. The identical holiday playlists looping endlessly through every store, as if variety were a seasonal liability. How December felt shorter every year, stealing time instead of marking it. The man mentioned he usually took an earlier train, but work had run long. When he spoke, his voice was steady and low, the kind that carried easily without effort. He listened as much as he talked, really listened, eyes attentive, head tilting slightly when Elliot said something worth following. Elliot found himself responding more than he intended to, filling silences without the usual self-consciousness. He noticed the way the man's gaze lingered, not on his phone, not on the window, but on him. "Staying late feels easier," Elliot said, choosing his words carefully. "It makes the evening feel accounted for." The man studied him for a moment, not probing, considering. "Busy can be a form of shelter," he said. Elliot felt the truth of it land quietly in his chest. He looked back at the window. His reflection hovered there, pale and slightly distorted by the dark glass. He looked older like this, more tired. He remembered when he'd believed love would simply arrive, unannounced but inevitable, like a season you didn't have to plan for. "I always thought Christmas was supposed to feel warmer, like you're meant to notice it more." The man followed his gaze. Their reflections overlapped faintly in the glass, two silhouettes layered over snow and light. "Maybe it's not about the season. Maybe it's about who notices you when everything else slows down." Elliot turned toward him fully. The words weren't dramatic, they weren't flirtatious in the obvious way, but they were intimate. They suggested presence, choice, the possibility that being seen could matter more than circumstance. The phrasing made Elliot turn toward him fully. There was nothing overt in the man's expression, no smile pushing for a reaction, just quiet certainty, presence. Elliot became aware of how close they were now, closer than before, though he couldn't recall either of them moving. Their knees were still separated by space, but the distance felt deliberate, charged. Elliot noticed the warmth radiating faintly from the man's coat, the clean, subtle scent of soap and cold air, the way his breath slowed when Elliot met his eyes. "I don't get noticed much," Elliot said lightly, like it was an observation rather than a confession. He hesitated, then added, "I keep wondering if there's something wrong with me. Not in a dramatic way, just enough to explain the pattern." The man held his gaze steadily, didn't rush to contradict him, didn't soften the truth with platitudes. "I notice you," he said slowly. "Maybe you just haven't been met properly yet." The words were simple. They landed anyway. Met. Not fixed, not saved, not chosen out of convenience. The train rocked gently, testing itself, then stilled again. Elliot became acutely aware of everything, the warmth radiating faintly from the man's coat, the subtle shift of his breath, the way his hands rested loosely around the empty cup. There was nothing overt happening, and yet everything felt charged. When the train finally lurched back into motion, the moment didn't break. It stretched. The announcement returned, movement resumed, continued delays. "Thank you for your patience." People stirred, checked phones, adjusted bags. Elliot felt detached from it all, anchored instead to the quiet gravity between himself and the man beside him. They stood at the same stop. The doors slid open, releasing a rush of cold air sharp enough to bite. Snow clung to the platform, fresh and undisturbed. The lights cast soft halos that blurred at the edges. "Well," the stranger said, pulling on his gloves slowly, deliberately, "I guess this is where we pretend we just shared something strange and expectedly nice." Elliot smiled, warmth blooming low in his chest. "I guess so." They walked in opposite directions. 3 steps later, "Hey." Elliot turned immediately. The man had stopped, snow already dusting his shoulders. Up close, he noticed the faint crease at the corner of his mouth, the easy confidence in the way he stood. Charming, Elliot realized, not because he tried to be, but because he didn't have to be. "If we're both stuck on this train again tomorrow," he said, voice quieter, more personal, "maybe we shouldn't pretend."
Elliot's heart kicked sharply. "Elliot," he said. The man smiled, slow and genuine. "Jonah." Snow fell between them, unbothered and patient. As Elliot walked home, the cold felt less severe, the lights felt less accusatory, and for the first time in years, the thought of tomorrow carried a different weight, not dread, not expectation, possibility. And that was today's story, one of 10 stories gently leading us toward Christmas. If this moment stayed with you, feel free to leave a comment or share it with someone who enjoys stories told from the heart. We'll meet again tomorrow for another encounter, another quiet spark, and one step closer to Christmas. Until then, take care and leave a little room for softness.